take the floor. Professor Gunn. Gus.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luke. Colleagues, it's a pleasure to join you again. I want to make some comments on this child Q issue and say what I think it represents for us as particularly Caribbean people and people of the African diaspora. I don't want to go into too much detail about what actually happened to child Q. I believe those details are pretty well known by now. I want to place it in a wider context about schooling and education in Britain, about our insertion into schooling and education in Britain, and about how we represented and protected our own interests in the early period of migration to this country, and where we are now. I believe it is too easy, really, to look at an incident such as what happened to child Q in that school in Hackney and see it as an isolated incident, or as, if you like, the zenith of the barbarism that these people are capable of, and not situated within our own struggles from the period when we came here after the Second World War to now. What I want to do in this short presentation is to remind us of those struggles, remind us of the fact that we did not simply sit down and resist and protest, but we built institutions to sustain us against the perpetual, perennial assault of the system upon us, our dignity, our rights, and what have you, and how this child Q situation fits into all of that and what we have to do about it. Okay, so the first thing I want to say is that from the moment we got here after the Second World War, 1950 onwards, my uncle from that wonderful little village in Grenada in which I was born, Concord, came here in 1951 on an island scholarship, and he did a PhD in science and engineering. My father came here in 1957 and was a worker in Lyons factories making cakes and so on and so forth for Lyons tea shops. My mother joined him in 1960 and worked as a hospital worker, cleaning floors, giving people teas, etc., at Acton General Hospital in West London. And my brother, the only one of my siblings who actually attended school in this country, went to Twyford Secondary School in Ealing and had the most miserable of experiences in that place and at the hands of the British police, the Metropolitan Police in Acton, Shepherd's Bush, Ealing, and so on. So when I came here in 1964, I came not as a worker, not as a member of the reserve pool of labor that colonial Britain had preserved and created in the Caribbean. I came here as a student of all things, theology. I was en route to becoming a Roman Catholic priest before I discovered how misguided I was and how corrupt the Roman Catholic Church was and all the rest of it. But when I determined to leave the Roman Catholic Church and immerse myself in political activism, it was principally around the issue of education. Because so many of our children were coming here to join parents who left them behind, as I had been left behind for a number of years, a varying number of years, with relatives, grandparents, aunts, godmothers, nenen, and everybody. What I discovered was that those children were being treated in the most ghastly manner by schools in Oxford and Oxfordshire. A disproportionate number of them being sent to school for the educationally subnormal. A disproportionate number of them being condemned as non-academic because of the home languages that they spoke, and so on. I mean, you would be familiar with most of that. But we didn't just complain. We determined that we could not let the schooling system in this country do as it will with our children. We had to intervene. And although we had no power to influence government in terms of what schooling as it was emerging should be in the light of 2 world wars, the relocation of people from the Caribbean, Africa, and so on, we felt that we could do something ourselves. We started the Black Supplementary School movement. As a student of theology at Oxford, I started a supplementary school on Cowley Road in Oxford in 1965. And so it continued, because we were determined that we would not allow English backwardness and racism determine the capacity and potential of our children. So roll on many years, and what we found is that Black children have been roundly designated as the section of the population causing trouble for Britain in terms of law and order, discipline in schools, and the rest of it. And I need not tell you of the phases we've been through with police stop and search, the sus movement, the sus campaigns, where the 1824 Vagrancy Act was used to criminalize young Black people simply for walking along the streets. If you looked into a BMW too tough, the police would arrest you because they thought you were about to steal the damn thing. And that went on for years until we ourselves campaigned against it. Now, the point I'm making is this, that although our parents came here with the highest aspirations for us, they came believing that education was the route to social mobility. And that it didn't matter whether they, like my parents, were functionally illiterate, their children could do better and should be given the opportunity to do better. That's why they came. When in 2018, some people were getting ready to go to Westminster Abbey and celebrate the arrival of the Empire Windrush in 1948. One bishop of a Black-led church had stupidly said that those who came on the Windrush in 1948 came seeking adventure, as if they had decided to don their khakis in Grenada and St. Lucia and Jamaica and so on, and come to Britain on safari. The most stupid, backward, illiterate argument anybody could make. Okay, and so the notion was that we came here and we built up modern Britain. Nobody asked the question, what did modern Britain do to us after all those years of exploitation, genocide, lack of reparatory justice, lack of reparations, and the rest of it. So we need to see the Child Q incident against that backcloth of the demonization of Black young people, the association of our children with criminality, rebelliousness, lack of respect for authority, and rules and so on and so forth. So what happened to Child Q, everybody thought was extraordinary and it was barbaric. It violated the young child, which is true. But then we tended to forget that it is that same approach, that same culture, particularly within the police, that gave rise to so many hundreds of Black people being killed while in police custody. So Child Q, in one sense, represented our George Floyd moment. But there'd been many like her long before. And you could name them. All of those people who are remembered by the family and friends gatherings, rallies, demonstrations every year. All of them, if you look at any one of them, from Christopher Adler to Roger Sylvester to Sean Rigg, any one of them, you see the same pattern, the same indifference that Chauvin demonstrated in Minnesota when he had his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, is the same indifference and nonchalance towards Black lives that the police have demonstrated in every one of those hundreds of cases of police deaths in custody. So what we have to ask ourselves is this: why is it that even if Britain knew the extent to which imperialism and colonialism led to a culture within the society, a mindset which suggested that whites were superior to Blacks, Blacks could be exploited and killed with impunity, why is it that when Britain decided to import us as a reserved pool of labor from across the Caribbean, and all of those people from other parts of the so-called Commonwealth, they did not determine that it had to do something about the way in which racism and imperialism had impacted upon the psyche of white people in Britain and was running through the DNA of this notion? That's the fundamental question. It has never been addressed. So we found ourselves constantly having to protest, to do repair, to prevent our children from being absorbed and damaged by that schooling system, while they went ahead, regardless, trying to suggest that we were the aberrant ones. We were being indifferent to good standards and the rest of it, and we needed to be brought into line. The schooling system joined the police in waging war on our children. In 1973, with John LaRose, Irma LaRose, Michael LaRose, Albertina Sylvester, and many others, we started the Black Parents Movement in North London. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from an incident involving John LaRose's two sons, Michael and Keith, at a school in Hornsey, where the police harassed them, sought to brutalize them for no reason whatsoever. And John and the other parents determined that they needed to do something about it. That's how the Black Parents Movement started, followed by the Black Youth Movement. And soon after that, at the Keskiddy Center, which some of us will remember, in King's Cross, off Caledonian Road, we had a conference to really launch the Black Parents Movement. And there we declared that independent parents' power and independent students' power was the key to change in education and schooling. Not long after that, we had a situation where a year 7 student joined Dalston Mount Secondary School off Shacklewell Lane in Hackney. And from the moment he joined the school, he was a victim of incessant bullying. He was one of a handful of Black boys in that comprehensive school. His parents made frequent visits to the school in the first and second terms of year 7 to complain about the bullies and to share their concerns about the impact of bullying on their son's well-being. The boy was sleeping fitfully. He was having nightmares and dreaded going to school and having to mingle with the bullies. The school dismissed the parents' concerns. That's now 40 years ago, okay? Arguing that they do not have evidence of bullying behavior in the school, that the boy could not produce any witnesses to corroborate his accusations, and that they, the school, would simply invite the wrath of the parents of the bullies if they were to take action against them. One week later, this boy was told by the bullies that they would get their elder brothers to come in and ambush him on the way from school and kill him. So he goes home terrified, and next morning, he packs a small kitchen knife in his bag and came to school to, in his words, defend himself against what was to come. During playtime, he told some of his friends who were worried about his safety, the few white boys in that school, that he had armed himself with this little kitchen knife. One white boy heard him, went to tell the bullies what they had heard. The bullies went to the teacher. The teacher then got this child's bag, searched it, and found this little kitchen knife. They called the school police, who arrested him, took him down to the police station without informing his parents, and charged him with having a bladed instrument. And for that, he was taken to court, and in court given a suspended prison sentence. The school did nothing about the bullies. It did nothing about the fact that this child was totally petrified. And their excuse to us, within us being the charity that I run on school exclusions, Communities Empowerment Network, their excuse was that he knew, this child knew, the school had zero tolerance of physical violence and of weapons, and therefore he had no right to determine that it was okay to pack this little kitchen knife and come to school. They ignored totally the bullying. They ignored totally the racist bullying and the fact that they gave no support to the child whatsoever or his parents, because when they complained, they dismissed it. Okay, roll on to child Q. This child, the teacher said they smelled cannabis. Whether that was the case or not, there are rules that the school has to follow. The school has to operate as everybody else within the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And on my count, 7 principles of those conventions were violated by that school. The child's best interests were not taken into account. The child's right to dignity and respect and human treatment was not taken into account. The parent's right to be informed of what the school was going to do to the child was not taken into account, and so on. 7 of them. And I, for one moment, cannot understand why people believe that that was a case where adultification, i.e. seeing Black children as more grown up than they are, was an issue. There was a 15-year-old child doing an exam. She was sitting in an exam, taken out of that exam by the school. They searched her. They found nothing. Rather than leaving the matter at that and taking her word for it that she had nothing, they then tried to call the resident police officer in the school, who was off duty because of COVID. They rang him and he said, call the police, which they did. And these 4 police officers came racing down to the school and searched the child in a manner that we all are familiar with now. Now, the question is, if they had that child interest at heart, why did they determine that the appropriate thing to do was to have police officers come and search her in spite of the fact that they searched and found no evidence? Why were they so intent on proving that she had something hidden within her body, for God's sake? Yeah? So my point is that it is because of that mindset about criminality and criminalizing our young people that that child was subjected to such violations. And after all of that, and preventing her from going to clean herself up in the toilet, she was expected to go into an exam and perform appropriately and according to her potential, as if nothing had happened. Totally barbaric. So the question then is, after we've expressed our anger, our visceral anger, righteous anger at all of that, just what are we going to do about it? Because we cannot depend upon the school who allowed that conduct on the police to do anything themselves to those teachers. The teachers were acting within a culture in which Black children were being routinely criminalized. We cannot depend upon the academy who employed that head teacher and those teachers to do anything about it. And I come back to what I said about we starting the Black Parents movement in 1975. We have lived through a period where schools have routinely denied the rights of our children. Human rights, rights on the Convention of the Child. And after the 2011 uprisings in Tottenham and elsewhere, following the police killing of Mark Duggan, the Home Office, the Metropolitan Police, and the DFE determined that they were going to take a more draconian attitude towards Black young people. They set up the gang matrix. And many children who had nothing whatsoever to do with gangs were put on that gang matrix, and the data was shared with head teachers. So we, in the Communities Empowerment Network that supports children excluded, found a spike in the number of kids who were being excluded from school for all sorts of stuff. If they wore a particular kind of uniform, or if they had their hair in braids, it was suggested that they were supportive of gang culture. And children were being excluded for the most spurious of reasons, because the Metropolitan Police and the DFE and David Cameron and Theresa May determined that they had to wage war on Black young people and on the streets, in the communities, and in schools. But we as a community roundly did very little about that. And many head teachers whom we, including me personally, as a caseworker in CEN, protested against in terms of the illegal exclusions of Black children, were saying to us, well, Gus John, you could say this, that, and the other. Our parents, our Black parents, support what we're doing because they do not want these young thugs affecting their children's capacity to forge ahead and realize the potential. So we have to deal with that reality. We cannot assume that all Black children are a homogeneous group. There are those who have supportive parents. There are those who deal with criminality in their homes. There are those who go to school smelling of weed because weed smoking is a regular routine practice within their homes, whether they're Rastafarian or not. In the same way that coke snorting is a routine practice in the homes of many of these white people who come to work clad in their ties and their whatever it is, presenting themselves as respectable citizens, upholding the values of British society. So we have to be clear about this. Not all Black parents are on the same page as us. There are many, particularly middle-class ones, who want to protect their children as much as possible from our children, whom they see as potentially providing the environment in which their children cannot thrive. And so what I believe needs to happen is this. We demonstrated outside Hackney Town Hall 2 Sundays ago, rightly and righteously. But the question is, after we've demonstrated, after we've vented our anger in relation to what happened to Child Q and demanded that the head teacher, the teachers involved should be sacked, what then do we do? Do we go away and wait until the next such event occurs, as it surely will, sooner rather than later? I mentioned the Caesar sisters in Hackney, Dalston Mount. In 1981, Child Q is happening in 2022. And in between, we have not built a movement of Black students. We have not built a national movement or union of Black parents. There are many more Black teachers now than there were then. They may be organized as a Black teachers network within the National Education Union, but they are not organized as a Black teachers forum to assist the organization, the self-organization of Black students and Black parents. So if we are not going to allow our children and their children to have to deal with this nonsense, this abuse, these violations routinely year after year, we've got to ask ourselves, how can we organize politically, collectively, to bring about the changes we need so that whether it be Zawadi or whatever his name is, the current education secretary, who is trying to tell us that teachers should have a more nuanced view of colonialism and imperialism and the genocides that caused, and not see the genocides as the main issue, but see the advantages, whatever he defines them as, that came to us as Black people. We have to organize ourselves to contest those kinds of narratives and ensure that nobody in the DFE, in any individual academy trust, premises or whatever can continue to take liberties with our children without knowing beforehand that they would have to account to us for that. I'm calling, therefore, for an urgent mobilization of Black students acting in their own right, in their own interests, an urgent mobilization of Black parents acting in their own interests, independently, and an urgent mobilization of Black teachers, whoever their employer is, to ensure that all of those children for whom we've made Britain their home have not got to continue to experience those kinds of degradations and to struggle so that their own children won't have to suffer them either. We have a historical responsibility, my friends, at this time, to understand what that Child Q issue means, place it in its historical context, as I've tried to do in the last few minutes, and see what our role must be in terms of challenging what the government has allowed schools to do, empowered them to do, with no accountability whatsoever to the people whom we elect to represent us at local levels. Let me end by saying one thing. I was asked by the Anti-Academies Alliance to review a book in the last 3 weeks. The book is called About Our Schools. It's written by Tim Brighouse, who was twice a chief education officer, Birmingham and Oxford, and Mick Waters, who was the chief executive of the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority. Those two eminent educationalists wrote this book, 603 pages long, a doorstopper of a book, I promise you, which I plowed through diligently to write this review. They covered 45 years of policy making around education, 45 years of schooling practices, schooling reforms, and the rest of it. And nowhere in that book, except in 3 paragraphs, where they talk about student safety and reference the murder in 1986 at Burnage High School in South Manchester of Ahmed Ullah, a Bangladeshi student murdered by Darren Colburn, a white English working class student. It is only in that context that they mentioned anything to do with race and education. So 45 years of schooling in Britain after the Second World War. And they do not even deal with the question of race and class in education and schooling policy. Shameful, disgraceful. And that tells us a lot. It tells us the extent to which we are totally marginalized and made peripheral to the discussion. And it tells us where we're headed unless we ourselves determine to take responsibility and do something about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gus. I think you deserve appreciation for that wide-ranging discussion. Early on, I wrote down why. You know, you're asking lots of why are these things happening, and it's good that you put it in the context. And before I continue, I noticed there's another Luke Daniels, and there's putting some questions in the chat, which is nothing about me. Share it. I don't know. Is there another Luke Daniels there? I don't know if we've been hacked or something. I don't know. Unless there's another Luke Daniel that's out there.
Maybe it's your alter ego, Luke.
Because I didn't write any of those questions or comments that I've seen there. Just wanted to point that out. But Omar, maybe you can check that out for me.
Yeah, you know what? If for the sake of ease, I can rename you just something very brief, like Luke Daniels 1. But anyways, let's continue.
Okay.
Okay. No, there's a hand up for that, Luke Daniels. Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to?
There is something strange happening, Luke. I did notice Gus came on as Margaret Busby, but he changed to Gus. I don't know.
Yeah, I had to just fix that one up. We had 2 Margaret Busbys at one stage.
Okay.
Daniels, but anyways,
okay. The Luke Daniels hand is up, but I'll leave it for
okay.
Let me just finish what I'm saying here with Gus, because, you know, let's not be distracted by being two of me on the same screen. Yes, I think it's good that you put it in that, frame it in that racial context, because, you know, much of this would not have been happening without the racism we've endured, and because of slavery and that brutalization that's gone on for so very long. And in this system that we're living in, that we know that one of the, and it has been said that one of the reasons that this happened to Child Q was because of the racism in the police. It's good that we also noticed that, you know, this had to be some racism operating within the schooling system, within the education system, for this girl to be singled out and dealt with in, as you put it, the barbaric action that they took. And so I think, you know, we need to be looking at this in a systemic way, in how we tackle it, how we deal with it. And you put 3 questions. How do we involve the Black student, the Black parent, and the Black teacher in dealing with this issue? I'd like to think that Caribbean Labor Solidarity, as an activist organization, has said, you know, we don't just have discussions, we will discuss it in our executive, and we meet next week to see where we might want to go with this question, and probably consult a bit with you on this through Gus, as one way of saying that. So before I open the floor up to questions, maybe you can tell us how maybe you think we can help Gus, and then we'll open up to other questions.
Well, yes, I mean, thank you for that. Let me say this. I think one of the most evident and powerful interventions we've made in terms of resistance to the systemic oppression we face is the Black supplementary school movement, which we started in the 1960s and came of age. Its focus altered within the last, I would say, 20 years or so, because rather than concentrating on things like decolonizing the curriculum, which we were doing as way back in the 1960s, academia and policymakers and the rest of it started talking about it in those terms only recently. But when you really consider what we were doing, it's precisely that we were decolonizing the curriculum, enabling our children to have a better sense of self, knowing where they came from, where they were situated right now and where they were going, and believing in themselves and in their high aspirations and the capacity to realize those aspirations. And you know, we had lots of people, university students, sixth form students and so on, coming and giving their time and introducing children to literature, to history, etc., which they never knew and never associated Black people with, right? Now, part of the problem, I think, is this. We have imbibed the narrative that the state has produced and propounded about ourselves, our capacity, our uselessness to the society. And we've taken sides. The Black community, which is never homogeneous, has really taken sides. There are those of us who are radical and revolutionary. There are those who are middle of the road, liberal, and there are those who are patently reactionary. And what we're finding within this government just now is there are two sets of Black people, or Black and global majority people. There are those who desperately wish they were white, like the Kemi Badenochs and so on of this world. And there are those who are apologists for imperialism and colonialism, like the current Secretary of State for Education. I mean, how could anybody talk such nonsense about you should give a balanced picture of imperialism and colonialism? It wasn't all bad. Who are you telling that to? All of those people who've gone to meet their maker as a result of genocide? All of those who were displaced as Caribs and Arawaks and Amerindians in the territories from which we've come? Who are you speaking this nonsense to? Are you going to tell the Jews of the world, not only of Britain, that they should have a more nuanced approach to the Holocaust and consider the situation from the point of view of the Third Reich, for Christ's sake? Shut up. Okay. The Education Secretary should be told to shut up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I think I'm saying is, let us remember that however much we might feel integrated, however much we might feel that, you know, we are here and the rest of them are there, left behind and otherwise, we are never safe as Black people until such time that we make sure that all of us are safe. All of our children have the capacity to go forward and realize their potential and be the best that they can.
Yeah.
So these are okay. We in this company particularly, we all know about the dialectics of liberation, all right? So we don't have to spend a lot of time on that.
Yes, yes.
What I'm saying is, in terms of the current situation, there are some very practical things we can do. Parents of children in every single school should be able to meet together, listen to their children about their schooling experience, including their experience of having to worry about going home safely because others like them are minded to stick knives into their bodies. Listen to all of that, and together, find ways of supporting those children, demolishing those practices and cultures that rope them in and have them hating themselves and one another, and do that systematically. There's no reason why we should not have these parent forums in every single borough and coming together nationally once a year to share experiences, to debunk what the government is trying to do in these schools and the expansion of the academization program and the rest of it. There are more children of us occupying alternative provision, pupil referral units and the rest of it than any other ethnic group in the country. We can't allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Nor can we believe that there is some genetic predisposition on the part of our people to murder and mayhem.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.